Okay, so today I'm going to show you how to perform an RGH on a Xbox 360 Slim Trinity motherboard. We know this is a Trinity because of the orientation of these two JTAG headers, J2C1 and J2C3. So the first thing, we're going to go over some basic tools that you need. I recommend a fiberglass scratch pen, as these points here can get very dirty over time, and this just cleans the kind of top layer off to ensure a better connection. You're going to need some flux. I like to use Amtech flux, and some solder wire. I also recommend some little snips for the wires, and I got my little set of wires here that I'm going to be using. You're also going to need an Ace V3 mod chip, so here's mine. And you're going to need a NAND flasher. I like to use the X flasher. Keep in mind that the Pico flasher will not work on this video, as we're going to need to program the chip, and the Pico flasher currently doesn't have any support for that. You're also going to need the NAND wires, so it's just a little port here with some exposed wires. You can see the colours of them here. You're also going to need this cable for programming the chip, so it's going to have the same kind of end, but it's a different port on the flasher. And you can see here, starts with VCC, ends with TMS, and that's how you know it's the correct cable. So the first step to the RGH process is to read the NAND file, make a backup of that file. So we're going to access that file through these two ports. So I'm just going to get my scratch pen, just run them over these headers like this. And that's just going to clean them up. And you can see they're already starting to get a lot more shiny. And there we go. Just give them a little wipe. You can see there, compared to some of the others, they're a lot more shiny and clean now. Next we need to what's referred to as tinning the points. So putting the solder balls on these points so that connecting the wires is possible. So we're gonna put some here and some here, and make sure there's a little bit in this left corner. And following the diagram on screen, you're going to tin these points. So with a nice clean iron, I'm going to come in here and just melt away the flux and start tinning the points. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this one on the bottom left is ground, so it's going to require some more heat. There we are. And then it's the third row and both of them. So one here and one here. So as we're doing an Ace V3 install, we're actually going to use some of these points here. So just put a little bit more flux on the bottom. And what we're going to do is these two. This one down here, and this one. There we go. So next what we need to do is connect the NAND wires to those points. So using the same diagram on screen, the colours from your wires will line up with the colours on that diagram. So we're going to start off by that. You can see that the top is brown, the one next to that is black, then we've got orange below the brown one, so I'm just kind of trying to bend that wire so it's straight. There we go. There we are. And then we got red on the other side. Okay, and then we've got yellow, which is the ground point. It's kind of hard to do this with visibility to the camera. Okay, so this wire has been used so many times that it looks like it's just lost a bit of its exposed end, so I'm just going to snip it and expose a little bit of the end there. There we go, just so we've got a bit of a cleaner. So as I mentioned previously, this yellow wire is going to need some more heat, so what I'm going to do is actually pump up the temperature on my iron. So I was on 340 before, I'm going to go to 390 for this point. And we'll see now, yeah, it just melts a lot quicker. And there we go. Yep, that looks good. Okay, so now we have got green and blue. So green is on the right side, like this, and blue is on the left side, like this. There we go. So now we've got those wires connected, what we want to do is plug in our flasher to the computer. So just plugging it in like this. There we go, and you can see the flasher lights up, and then we're going to get this end, make sure that the point where you can see the pins is down, and plug it in. And we also need to connect standby power to the console, so we don't want to turn the console on. You can see here that the ring of light board is actually unplugged. We just simply want standby power. So there we go, standby power. And now we're going to go over to JRunner and start reading the NAND. So over here on JRunner, you can see we've got XFlasher connected, and we want to make sure where it says read NANDs here that this says 2, and then we're going to click read NAND. And that is going to give us a flash config. It's going to identify the console as Trinity 16 megabyte, and it's going to start reading those 2 NAND backups. So I'm kind of glad this has happened so I can demonstrate. You can see here it compares the 2 NAND backups, and it said some bad blocks were found. Now this doesn't matter as long as it says bad blocks remapped and NANDs are the same. If it says those, then you're okay to proceed. If it doesn't, then I recommend retrying your wiring, as 90% of the problem is the wiring. Now what we want to do is write the ECC file, or Xell, to the console. This is going to allow us to boot and find our CPU key once the RGH wiring is installed. So what you want to do over here is make sure glitch 2 is selected. Select SMC Plus and click create Xell. This is going to make your Xell image, and then we're going to click write Xell. Now this is just writing 50 blocks to the console, and it's going to say write successful. And now we can proceed to the RGH wiring and boot into Xell. So what you want to do now is unplug the power port. You want to unplug your NAND flasher from the header. I'm going to unplug my power supply because it likes to make a weird sound. And now we're going to install the ACE V3 chip. So if you buy your chip new, it's going to come with a little piece of adhesive, but mine doesn't, so I'm just going to use some standard adhesive, kind of double-sided tape I have. It doesn't really matter. So when you've got the chip on its back, what you want to do is position the tape more towards these points here, as we don't want these touching the motherboard and grounding out. So you can see here I'm kind of going to position it here towards these points. I'm going to put another piece down because my adhesive is quite thin, and just like that, and there we go. So now just peeling off that adhesive, we want to stick it in this orientation, so we want the points we're going to solder to coming towards this chip here. And I'm going to place the chip about here. You still want to be able to see this hole and these two little resistors. So yeah, I'm just going to place it down there, stick it down, give it a little bit of force, and there we are. So now we need to solder the wires to the motherboard. You can find these diagrams in the description, but I'm also going to put them on screen. So we're going to start off with unraveling my little wire pack here. Your wires might look differently. It's most common that they're just all red, but it doesn't really matter. You can use whatever wire you want. So here are my wires. You can see we've got a long blue one in this set. Here we are. So the only wires I'm interested in the minute is 2 for ground and power. So in this set you can see that these wires are thicker, and that's just because for power you want a thicker wire than for kind of signal points. The first one I'm going to connect is ground. So what I'm going to do is get a little bit of flux and put it on all these points here, just flow it across like that. The same way we did with the JTAG headers, we're gonna tin these points here. So heat up the pad, push the wire in, just like that. So first I'm gonna do ground. So I'm gonna heat up the pad and put in the ground wire, just like that. Now these wires come a little bit too long, so make sure that the wire is not sticking out and touching any of these other components. Now for the ground point, we can solder to this point here we pre-tinned, but as this guide is focused on the most simple way to mod a console, we're going to avoid that point and instead solder it to the AV shield. So I'm going to get this wire, stick it under these cables here, and grab it out this end, and we're going to solder it here to this point, just to the metal shield. So grab a pair of tweezers. I like to use these little cutters because they've got a kind of a sharper end, and just scratch up this shield here, just so the solder has something to adhere to. You can see there it's all scratched. Get a tiny bit of flux, place it on that shield, and you'll be able to see here we can just melt the solder on here and just feed it in, and it's going to stick quite well. Just kind of move it around so it gets in between all the crevices. There we are, just like this. Don't keep your iron on here for too long. Okay, there we are. So that point is now ground. So we just get the wire, bend it around, heat up that point, and stick the wire in just like that. There we go. And now this chip is grounded out to the chassis. The next point we're going to do is 5 volt. So once again, grab your wire and stick it in this point here. This 5 volt pad. There we are. And the 5 volt point is going to be this bottom point here. So we're going to get the wire, and it's going to go to this point, Now this wire is a little bit too long, so I recommend when soldering to these smaller points you just trim the wire back about that much is exposed. Gonna get this point and just feed it in there, just like that, and there we go. That's all connected nice. So going across, we're going to skip point C for now, and we're going to go to point E, which is also on this little header. So for this you want to use one of the shorter wires. So point E, just solder that in to the chip. And once again, this wire comes a little bit too exposed, so we're going to trim it back. Just like that. And E is going to go to this point here. So it's kind of difficult to show here. You want to make sure as well that you don't cover this point, because we need to solder to both the ones in this column. So there we go, just like that. We're going to do point F next, which again we need a shorter wire for. Just trim the end of that point just on one side, and then the longer side you want to stick into the chip. So point F, here we go, and that's going to go to the point next to the E wire. So just like that. There we go. So you can see now the only points remaining is C and D, and those are on the underside of the motherboard. So we're going to start with point C, getting one of the longer wires, and we're going to put that into point C on the chip, just like this. There we are. And then we want to route it through this hole here, this larger hole, just like this, and push it through. Pull it all the way through, and you want to make sure it's quite a tight kind of connection there, so it just loops around the corner. Flipping the board over, this wire is going to come out here, and it's going to solder to this point here. So the way I like to remember this is from the outside 1, 2, 3, so it's this point here. Place a little bit of solder on there, so we're going to flux it up and tin that point. There we go. I think it'll be easier to flip the board around to do this. So what you want to do is kind of have it come here and then have a curve into the point. So I'm going to cut off probably that much wire there and expose that end. There we are. So with a bit of solder on the end of your iron, the way to do this is come from this angle and have it just touching. So like this. And there we go. Nice good connection. I'm going to flip the board over again and connect the D wire. So I'm going to connect that. There we are. Once again through this hole here, and then flip the board over. So it's going to come out and it's gonna go to this point here, FT4R2, which is this point here. So I'm gonna kind of snip it there. Expose the end of that wire. Once again, tin that point, this one here. There we are. And come in with that wire here onto that point. There are some smaller pads next to it, so just make sure not to bridge it to those. And there we are. Gonna redo that actually. So I think I need a little bit more flux. The joint looks a bit cold. And there we go, that looks connected. Okay, so that is the glitch chip installed. Now what we need to do is program the chip with our timing file. Now to program the chip, we're going to connect to these points here. Some people solder to them, but I found that you can use a piece of pin header here. And I know this is a method a lot of people use. And then you can kind of just get the pin header, put it in here, and then just pull back a little bit and it connects, and you can program it that way. So once again, plug in your flasher, plug in this cable, just like that. And what you'll be able to see here is that when we put this in to the point, the chip's going to light up. So TMS on here is going to go into the top circle. So VCC is the square hole. So you just want to put it in there. Kind of apply a little bit of pressure on it with your finger. And then we're going to go into JRunner and program that. So in JRunner we're going to go up here to program timing file, SRGH Trinity, and then we're going to start with the 60.3.05 timing file, and still holding that connection we're going to click program, and it's going to say flashing, so mine's failed, which indicates maybe not a great connection. Okay, so it turns out I wasn't applying enough pressure to that point, but you can see here now it says flash successful. And just leave JRunner open, but now we're going to boot the console into Xell. Okay, so now you want to connect the ring of light board back here. I'm going to plug in my power supply again. There we go, just into the back. And also HDMI into the console. Right here. And what we can do here is just kind of touch here and it's going to turn on. And you can see there the chip glitching. And there we go, successful boot into Xell. So the part on Xell we're looking for is the CPU key, so keep note of that, and now we're going to type it into JRunner to unlock the NAND image. So on JRunner here, in this box which says CPU key, I've entered the CPU key, and you can see it says CPU key is correct, added CPU key to database. Now what we're going to do is create the XeBuild image, which is the dashboard. So once again, make sure this is glitch 2 SMC Plus 17559. come over here and click Create XeBuild, and then we're going to connect up the flasher again. So plug in power to the console. We're going to get the X flasher here. Make sure this cable's unplugged for the glitch chip. Plug it in and plug this NAND cable in again. So over here on the computer again, we're going to click Write NAND, and that's going to write the UPD flash.bin to the console. So once that's done, we can successfully boot into the dashboard. So with that image written, unplug the X flasher, unplug power, and then plug it back in. And then grab your HDMI cable, plug that in, and then once again we're going to boot the console. Just click here. There we go. It's going to boot up again. There we go. So it's booted into Xell here because I've clicked the eject button here. So we're going to turn the console off, and you'll see now if I can touch the power button, it's going to boot into the dashboard. So there we go, that was the power button sound. So that's how the console is going to work now. The eject button on boot is going to boot into Xell. Once again, glitching. Successful boot, and this will be the dashboard now. And there we go, Xbox 360. So the console is now successfully RGH'd. Now it's just a little bit of cleanup and we'll be ready to reassemble the console. So now just unplug power, unplug HDMI, and we're going to remove the NAND wires as we don't need these anymore. So these two here, and these 5 here. Just make sure that none of these are bridging. And now what we can do is grab some isopropyl alcohol. I use 99.8% IPA and spray a little bit on the board like that. And then I like to get a toothbrush and just kind of brush those points down to clean them. Just like that. Not too much pressure on those, but just give them a little clean, because the flux, not only is it sticky and just a bit horrible inside, it's actually corrosive. So if you leave this flux on the console, over time it could cause damage. So I'm just kind of using a circular motion. And we also applied flux on here, so just a tiny bit of IPA on there, and just kind of brush that off. Just like that. We also applied some up here. A little bit there, and some there. Flip the console over, and we applied flux to these 2 points as well. So just some IPA on those, and just brush it. You want to brush kind of the way the wire is going, so there's not too much pressure. And like that as well. And there we go. So that's all cleaned up. Now, I recommend getting some Kapton tape or electrical tape and just placing it kind of on these wires, but don't place it on the point where you've soldered to. Just place it kind of in between the wire. You can do that on the front side too if you like. But yeah, for now, that is the console successfully hacked. Hope you enjoyed this video. If it was helpful, leave a like. Let me know in the comments. I love reading comments of people who've followed my tutorial and hacked their consoles, or it's helped them out. So leave a comment, make sure to subscribe, and thanks for watching.